Our presentation is actually, it's a modified version of one that we had planned for Archaeology Month in March, with more time that was scheduled for a March on-site discussion and visit to Velda. And it included Louis, as well as Brandon Ackerman and Josh Goodwin and myself from then VAR. And we were going to respectively share the history of the site. That was something that I was going to contribute. And then Louis was going to present his work, which was really extensive, far more than any of us had done at that stage. And that was to reanalyze the unpublished data that was recovered from the mitigation of the Velda village in 1969. And then the PLA, the current PLA staff, we had considered GPR work, and we had initiated that, and we had done some test work, some test units, and then we were planning on actually testing the southern end of the actual mound. And then came COVID and other events that thwarted our efforts. But tonight, due to the time constraints, we can't possibly present all of this, and so we agreed that we wanted Louis to present his work, which has yet to be formally shared as being the focus of our presentation, because it's really the meat and potatoes of what we want to share tonight. And we hope that in the future, we will be able to return to Velda and do this work to carry out testing around the mound. Thanks to Louis, we know that there wasn't previous testing there, and then look at the south end of the mound, and then hopefully present at another past meeting in the future. So we're very optimistic about that. But going forward, Velda is significant to past, as far as I'm concerned, for two principal reasons. Okay. The first is that it was the first project that past undertook as a fledgling FAS chapter back in 1998.
We agree it's going to be a Louisiana storm, but look, some of the models are putting over by Lake Charles, European model.
Okay. I know we want to make sure that we don't have any hurricanes threatening us at the moment, so that's good. Okay, so again, the first reason why I think it's particularly significant is because back in 1998, and this is one of my first jobs at BAR, and Louis hired me, and it was to work on a project that Jim Miller had that would allow us to create a park, a passive public park to interpret Velda. And at the time it was a shambles, and past stepped up, as I said earlier, a fledgling FAS chapter, and did a yeoman's job of being able to clean it up and regularly, you know, on a seasonal basis, address all of the issues and then help interpret it. But in addition, it's also important to us because we're past. So we are the Panhandle Archaeological Society of Tallahassee, and Velda is a significant site in that it holds considerable potential for helping us as archaeologists understand a key period in North Florida prehistory, which is the Fort Walton period. So somewhere in roughly, I'm not going to go into dates because Louis will fuss at me and he'll get into those details later, but I'd say roughly between 1000 going into the mission period. But Velda served to define the middle phase. So without further ado, with me rambling on about the history, and I could wax forever about it because there's so much to share about what great things past did to help support Velda. We're going to go right into the data. And so the first thing that I want to share with you is just a general site location of Velda. And you can see this is Greater Tallahassee, and there's Leon County to the left. And Velda Mound is located just on the edge of I-10. In fact, the part that Louis is going to present on was destroyed. It was mitigated due to the construction of I-10. And then this is a slightly more close-up view of where it is. So I-10 now is on your left-hand side. And this is a map that was proposed for the development of the neighborhood that the mound would be incorporated into. And it was negotiated. Ross Merrill made a considerable effort to try to preserve the mound, despite the fact that the village was going to be destroyed. And it was incorporated into what's known today as Arbor Hill. And now, and this is an old map showing how it looked before it was actually acquired by the state. And so now what I'm going to do is turn the discussion over to Louis, which starts with the reconstruction of the 1969 map of the site, and let him go from here. So I'm going to have him take over the pilot's chair. I'm going to move over here, Louis.
Sure.
Have whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay.
And I'll help
If
you.
I can get down.
Okay, it's
Yeah.
okay. So you can see
Yeah.
yourself, and then you're just watching the presentation.
Looking at myself.
You don't have to look. Just look at your
The
images.
doughboy time to move out.
Okay.
Anyhow, yeah, Noblin Realty donated the site to the state. But with the project began in 1969, yeah, the proposed, shoot, wrong glasses. Sorry. Sorry. Sitting there, forgot to change to reading glasses. So, crap. I know, I've got to get a new one. Anyhow. So the project began in 1969 with the taking of elevations to prepare a topographic map. They developed a 6-meter grid. Sorry, Mary's showing me which buttons to push.
Okay, you pushed it already. Okay.
I'm used to doing a mouse. 6-meter grid, which is what the, sorry. Pointing to the map doesn't help here. 6-meter grid for most of the site. It was surface collected. And then that identified concentrations of artifacts. And then from there they went to a 3-meter grid in a selected area for excavation on the southern end portion of the project, because I-10 had shifted southward enough that area was totally going. And the northern end of the grid would be within the conservation area, or what became a conservation area.
And I'm going to interject from time to time, but I just want to make people realize the big contribution here that Louis made was that for years we didn't know exactly the location of where the village was in relation to the mound until he reconstructed the map, which was very time consuming. And so while you're looking at what seems to be a very simplistic map, Louis went through a lot of effort to help us geolocate the specifics of the excavation units in the area.
Yeah. About 40 years ago, the field notes and project records kind of disappeared from the file. At any rate, they used the information on the bags and the 5x8 provenience accession cards that were filled out at the time of the project to reconstruct what units were excavated, and based on that, I created the map. And then with the Mary and Marie found the electronic copy of the topo map, which I cleaned up in Photoshop to make it publication quality. And then I resized the 6-meter map to fit on the datum for the topo map. And then that gave gave what you see in front of you now. The 3-meter excavation area is that concentration in the center south area, where it's a bunch of little smaller boxes. That'll make it March now. Anyhow, so that archive slides, the archive slides on the top of your graphic. I don't know what I did.
Don't keep going. You're fine. Ignore it.
Now, on top of the graphic shows the 6-meter grid, and then because of the time constraints and so much area, Ross and them decided to strip off the topsoil to expose pit features and possibly structural remains, and that using a grader. And then in the 3-meter area, which is the bottom part of this slide, they started excavating the units. And of course, from the excavation, we had showing that they're filling out the records forms for the excavation units, the screening the material, documenting post holes, like on the lower left, and documenting pit features. Most of the pit features were in an area close to what was designated structure 2, and they seem to be of ceremonial use. But we'll get to that a little later. When structures are burnt, you end up with, as you all know, the ceramic clay on the walls becomes baked hot enough that it becomes a brick-like material. And then from that, you can deduce information on the building construction. Say like on the top left and the other top, you have portions of the impressions from the post molds and the cross piece mold, the crossbars. And then to that, they tied stuff. And one of the, for instance, on the center left, you can see some little shadows in the daub immediately to the left of my reconstruction of a knot that would have created the kind of impressions that you can see in the daub. To the bottom, you've got the split cane matting that was used as the lath work to be fastened to the walls, and the clay was plastered on either side of that. And then we've got the palm frond impressions from different Apalachee structures, showing that they put the roof on before they did the clay siding, because the clay went all the way up and squeezed into the underside of the roof thatching. They also sanded the posts down on the inside, and that wore the sandstone down to the shape of the post, and the diameters on those coincide with the diameters of the post molds in the ground, as well as the diameters in some of the daub. The next side that was omitted would have been a slide of the red ochre and white chalk that showed similar rounding, where they were used to color posts, perhaps, and smaller posts, perhaps to hold trophies and stuff. That slide got cut out. I had to cut this down to half of what I originally wanted. I went and did some, aggressive deletions. So the expedient flakes, the curated flakes, the groundstone tools, chunky stones and stuff, and cells, fragments, and batterstone, those are cut out. So what we have is the
But don't despair, because you'll have the report available and you can read all these details. But Louis is more than aware of the fact that, we have a limited amount of time for this presentation.
Yeah, in the report, there's on those 6 meter and 3 meter grids, the distribution of the different artifacts is shown by numbers and density. At any rate, in the area, they collected the early archaic, middle archaic artifacts that were probably either lost at the site during incidental butchering and camping activities during those time frames, or they were scavenged and brought to the site by the Apalachee during the Fort Walton and later Leon Jefferson periods, since a number of the expedient tools and so forth are reworked older artifacts. The Tallahassee point on the left is from the Wheaton Island period, and that was probably an incidental breakage and loss from a hunting event a few hundred years before the Apalachee. The Pinellas, in the triangular points, are the Pinellas, the Sand Hills, the Alino, and so. And those date to the Apalachee. Then there are two reworked Middle Archaic blades that have been restemmed. Sorry, did I push it backwards or
No,
not?
you're fine. You're good.
Yeah. For the audience, because we were expecting a general audience, I put together some graphics to give people a better understanding of this. So what you have is the hafted, blades and points and stuff. On the left, you see the sequence of reduction from resharpening of the blade till it becomes exhausted. And usually when you end up with that bifacial kind of steep exhausted thing, those are normally the exhausted forms of Middle Archaic points and stuff that Bullen renamed Wasissa. And I think he erred on that. For the most part, those are the exhausted older blade, Middle Archaic blades, and not a discrete point type. The base of the point is what's the clue. On the right is another Middle Archaic blade that when they restemmed it, for whatever reason, the stem was put as a slight angle, and it caused the blade to make it an angle. So when it was used, it was sort of, its function is similar to the funny tang points that are called Cody knives, although this isn't one.
And let me just add that Louis did all these graphics himself. So to be able to illustrate how they were hafted and how they were worked, these are all his creations.
Anyhow,
Anyhow.
Again,
Club shape, Paleo-Indian exhausted blade core.
where was I? Sorry, since I
Okay, club shape, Paleo-Indian exhausted.
stone artifact. The stone. Can they see the top of the screen? Oh, is that?
There you go.
Sorry. On this end, part of the thing was masked by a scroll down feature. Anyhow, stone artifact implications that included a big blade core that was Paleo-Indian, that was club shaped and not further modified. And I believe the Apalachee just brought it back to the site, for that use. At any rate, the village area stone artifacts suggest that there were incidental hunting and animal butchering activities on the ridge crest during the centuries preceding the arrival of the Apalachee. However, the majority of the on-site stone artifacts were brought to and processed at the site by the Apalachee. Some of the material was collected at area church quarries and processed at the quarry-related camps before transport to the site for tool fabrication. We know that because there's very little primary and secondary decortication flakes. It was pretty much processed elsewhere, and that waste material left. They did, however, scavenge usable flake and waste material that were the larger flakes from the Middle Archaic and campsite and early Archaic campsites, and that's what they used primarily to make their expedient tools. And obviously, you can tell that because it has the older patination versus the younger patination from the flaking, primarily to make the smaller projectile points, the shaves, scrapers, and knives. So, but skipping down to make it march a little bit, the sherds from the site and which was, I guess, close to 20 or 30,000. But anyhow,
She's muted, so
she can't hear me.
yeah, she can hear you, but she can't talk.
Sorry.
Mhm.
And from those, most of them were plain body shards, but there were the diagnostics, primarily.
He was a bot, and he looked at every single one. Louis is amazing.
Anyhow, they were primarily plain body shards, but we had the diagnostic rims and stuff for that we could use for the lake shacks and the entire suite of lake shafts and rims, from the single node, the double nodes, the applique strap and loop handles, the rim ticking and notching and stuff. But and that's shown in the left side. There's also the oscilloplane, walk and smaller, bowls and simple bowls. They had a larger than expected Lamar Plains series, at least compared to other Fort Walton sites that I've looked at. But then that gets down to, when we get to structure 2, we'll be discussing that concentration. That's in the center area. In the upper right, you've got Point Washington incised, which is mostly sand tempered, whereas the others that are made on site are grog and crushed clay grit tempered. And the Point Washington seems to be an imported ware brought in from the Choctawhatchee Bay area based on its tempering. Of course, we have the Fort Walton incised in its different variations, including the top Fort Walton incised element. Doesn't show very well on the scan, but that's the hand motif. Then bottom right Fort Walton is the typical scroll motif, and the bottom left is a Englewood style one. We have the typical Carabel punctate late variety shirts, which Scary wanted to call McGinnis. But Calvin and I like Carabel punctate late variety, and it had many more variations that are normally discussed. We also had the typical Leon check stamped, both the varieties Leon and Mercer. That's the center right. And then we had the Jefferson ware, or Lamar complicated stamp, being the varieties Jefferson, Early, and so forth. Mary's telling me I gotta make it March. Anyhow, we also had Cool Branch incised, and now the 4 varieties of Cool Branch, we had 2 of them. The standard Cool Branch incised variety Cool Branch, and then the Cool Branch incised variety Waddell's that Calvin and I named. And that type is a more or less a ceremonial type of ceramic that was used in for the black drink ceremonies. Anyhow, getting toward the end, what have we learned from can't get the last page. Learn from the Native American artifacts, where they're locally made, where they suggest single occupation and so forth. Well, the artifacts suggest that the site was occupied for several generations, beginning during the Fort Walton period, when the platform mound was constructed. Profile of the mound shows the top graphic. You'll see the mound from a top view, and in the center of it, there's sort of a gouge-like strip. That was where, back in the 60s, the previous foreman for Velda Dairy, bulldozed through it to see what was in it. And then just north of that, there's a big hole area that was like a big giant foxhole that area kids and looters dug thereafter. And then it distorted the shape because their spoil got thrown out and down the sides of the mound. I worked out the reconstruction of the orientation and shape of what I thought the original mound looked like. But regardless, Fairbanks did a profile that I colorized, back in years ago. And then the Apalachee Anthropological Society, they preceded past. When we did a cleanup at the site, we did just a single unit to see what was left and see if we could verify what Fairbanks recorded. And as you can see from the clay layers and the gray layers, there's a sequence of floors going up and then some pit features coming down and intruding. And that's at the edge of the southern part of the mound. The northern part of the mound is pretty much disturbed. And that's the part of the mound that Mary was talking about that they wanted to test and confirm the sequence.
We want to look at the southern end.
Oh.
We want to look at the southern end.
It is southern end.
Oh, yeah, but you said the northern end is
Sorry,
disturbed.
said the northern end was disturbed.
Mm-hmm.
So we're
We're
digging in the southern end.
Yeah.
At any rate, where the 3-meter units were done, there was a smaller round structure designated structure 2A, and it sected a series of older pits. The post molds did. And then there was structure 2B, which is an enlargement placed on the same area. The feature 8 on that produced the radiocarbon date that John Scarry used to date the site. And that's why he was saying it was earlier. Well, it predated those structures. So there was that earlier component. But what it did is it meant that he started his Velda Mound much earlier than it should have been. The first Velda phase. And when you got to the artifacts, including later on when the excavation area has by the red arrows, the southernmost red arrow in the cluster is the structure 2. Going just south of the mound, there was a pit feature that had some Spanish metal artifacts in it. And then the mound to the north of that. The Spanish artifacts, were very, very few of them at the site. But basically, my impression was that the site 2, because of the pit features that had broken vessels, some broken vessels in them, in the area of structure 2, plus some individual exotic things, were pits that were ceremonial deposits that were placed in there, and that the occupants of the village, led by that shaman, were among the Apalachee that resisted the conversion to Christianity, and that violated the directives out of San Luis to not follow their traditional culture ways. And as a result, the structure 2 was burnt. And it's either accidentally burnt, or my impression is that it could have been burnt by the Spanish during their period of retribution in 1675 after one of the rebellions. At any rate, that's bringing us pretty much to the end of, and Mary's already done some of the concluding remarks, but the artifact types and their distribution provide information that helps interpret the chronology of events and types of activities that Native American site occupation conducted. The occupation spanned a period of several centuries, particularly during the Fort Walton and Leon Jefferson periods. That would be from about 1100 to 1675. Now, the detailed information was obtained from the archaeological excavations in the southern portion of the I-10 project. My impression is, based on historic documents and other stuff, that every couple generations, the site occupants would move off the site to give the fields a chance to go fallow and refurbish. And the historic documents talk about, like the Cacique, John Hand's translation, Cacique at Avita Chico, for instance, complaining that the fields were low on yields and stuff, and he wanted to move a league away. And then we've got two Patales. So periodically, so this site, some of the occupants probably went to the High Ridge site that was on Mary's earlier map that has a date that postdates the date from the from the structure 2 area, but it predates the Spanish material and the rest. So I think they went through cycles of moving off and then moving back onto the site after it had a chance to refurbish. And High Ridge would have been one of the locations they moved to. If we had more intense survey of the surrounding areas, we'd probably have other sites that portions of the occupants could have gone to.
That would be south of I-10.
South of, but the site itself occupies the ridge. To the east of the site, it does drop down to a lake that's currently in a park. And I know from informants in the area that in the creek, one of the creeks near the site, where one of the ceramic pipes was found, that there's limestone outcrops. I haven't walked it to see whether there were chert outcrops amongst the limestone. But I did caution the teenage informants to be careful, because it was during the summer when they were doing it, of moccasins, because there were washout crevices and stuff along the sides of the creek, which would have been places that they would have denned and they could have gotten hurt for their curiosity. Anyhow, I'll let Mary wrap up the rest of it.
You don't want to say anything about where do you think Velda fits into the bigger scheme?
Or what?
Why don't you tell the audience what you think about where Velda fits, or discussion about where Velda fits into the bigger scheme of Fort Walton?
Well, I think, well, basically, the early Fort Walton in the area, and Nancy White and Michelle have looked at a lot of that, and seen on some of the forms of interpretation or misinterpretation. Every one of us gets to recognize a little bit about what we did. When I did, for instance, the Leon County survey and did my sites, I broke the Apalachee into early and late, with meaning the mountain phase of the Fort Walton and the post-mountain phase that would have done with it, coincided with what I believe was the DeSoto winter camp, the Martinside area. And then after that, it transitioned into the Leon Jefferson phase. There was they already had contacts, a few artifacts from the Martin site show the contacts with the Lamar folks through exchange. But after the Soto expedition, with the swine flu or whatever, reducing population, and then the Muskogean expansion eastward, across the valleys in Alabama and Georgia, but it displaced the Lamar population, and portion of that Lamar population was displaced down to the Apalachee area, and the amalgamation of the two gives you the early Leon Jefferson, which has both Fort Walton ceramics and the Lamar ceramics merging, and then they gradually shift. And that early Fort Walton is basically the Leon Jefferson is the Christian expansion. 1633 is when that came in to the Apalachee area, to San Luis till 1704. Well, some of the Apalachee didn't convert to Christianity, and those are the ones that Hand referred to as the pagan or the non-Christians. So the ones that converted became the late San Luis phase that Scurry would have talked about. But he tried dating based on the date from that feature at Fort Walton. He tried dating his Velda to 1400 to 1633. And there I think he was mistaken, because I think it's really post DeSoto to at least 1675. And it was coinciding with the converted people. They became at odds with the ones who were maintaining the thing. And I'm not so sure that the buried Spanish artifacts in that little cash deposit near the Velda Mound weren't the result of a kind of a revitalization movement where the shamans and stuff were trying to hang on to their culture. And I'm sure that Nancy will have an alternative interpretation, but that's the fun of archaeology. If we all agreed, we'd go no place. If we can have areas where we agree and disagree, and then we work to refine and find out what's more accurate, then we can advance and have a better understanding of the past. And then from the past, we can also apply those lessons to the present.
Okay, Marie, so I shifted back the wheelhouse to you. So if you want to entertain questions or do anything like that, Louis is exhausted but amenable.
Louis, that was fantastic.
Yay! I thought it was great. Yes.
Can you all hear me? Guy says I'm not coming through.
Everybody, yeah, unmute to talk, everybody.
You're coming through fine.
Okay, good. We just want to check, make sure everybody's.
Yeah.
What a great way to wrap it up. I mean, that was just wonderful presentation.
Excellent. He's superb. I knew you.
All right. Does Jim has a question?
Well, the question is it seems to me like with the new technology of OSL dating ceramics is a way to answer the question about the timing, because it is very accurate for the time period you're talking about, better than radiocarbon dating by far. So all it takes is money and a grant, but if you could date some of the pottery, you could figure out the age.
Okay, Jim, so let me, I'm going to weigh in for
Mary
a
was
second.
working on that already, I thought.
Yeah, we were, and I was trying to coordinate with Willett. He was working more in the Gainesville area, but it just came down to the fact that when I was still with the state wasn't really all that keen on entertaining that amount of money for the dating. But it doesn't mean that going forward we can't find sources to help us pay for some of those samples, but it's going to have to be very experimental, because we're going to have to work, from a very specific site and then out to make sure that what we're dating is what we want to know the age of. But we had that plan, it didn't quite come to fruition.
And they're suggesting on that sampling, not so much the general village area, because so much of that was not in tight context, but rather the artifacts that came from the pit features, because those seem to be, ceremonial deposits. They also, at least 2/3 of them, I guess, Marie had at least one reconstructible vessel in it. And those are distinct vessel types, so that you have the dating and stuff. So you're not just dating a sherd and saying, well, the site was occupied during this time. You're helping to refine the dating for the artifact seriation.
Right. Well, you will date, when you date that, the last time it was assuming it's a cooking pot, it will date the last time it was used to cook something in. The OSL dating for ceramics is totally different than just dating dirt. Anyway, but I'm sorry that I was hopeful that the Bureau might be able to do that. They never did it, but that's water over the dam. But I don't know if anybody out there is listening and they have some grant money. Well, it could be done.
Yeah, we're very hopeful that just, it's still the wonderful thing about DHR and BAR has been that these are public lands, and if one proposes a good research project and gets a permit, then there'll be an opportunity. So we'll see if we can move forward. Like I said, the PLA staff, Brandon and Josh, are still very much interested in continuing with our GPR work, because Louis was the one who demonstrated that after all these years, the village work and the mitigation did not come anywhere near the mound. And so we know that that area around it was not tested. So there's still potential to help us glean a little more information. So I'm just saying that I think there's a lot of potential in, whether it's BAR or somewhere else, there's hope that we can get more information, because this is a really significant site in terms of the periods, and I think it will really contribute to what we know about Fort Walton currently.
Yeah. And for
I really enjoyed the talk, Louis.
Rocks.
And for Nancy and her students, when I did the appendices on the artifacts, I took the spreadsheet and I broke it down. It was also to help me write the report, but it broken down for each category of artifact. So all the Fort Walton size shards are inventoried as a group, followed by all the whitewashing. All the different ceramic types have the overall inventory, and then you've got an inventory with the accessions for each of the standalones. And then hopefully, if somebody is doing research on given styles and stuff, and when you look at vessel forms, the tempering and the rest of it, that they can get with Marie, because they've got the accession numbers to go with each of those artifacts, and they get to the individual artifacts that way that they're interested in studying.
Yeah.
Louis, I love your talk. I agree with about everything you said. I'm not sure about the shamans, because that's not really testable, but hey, why not? But I was gonna ask you, all the Lamar that we have in the Apalachicola Valley seems to date around 1700, slightly before, slightly after. And I'm pleased to hear that there was some Spanish stuff at Velda. I didn't know that. I've never even seen it, but, and I was gonna ask about the water source, but then you show this beautiful lake. So there is a creek. How close is a river that goes somewhere is one question. And the second question is, in all the inventory of artifacts, isn't there any charcoal left anywhere to date?
Sorry, to date what?
Is there any charcoal from any features that could still be dated? Because when it was dug, you can have a tiny little piece for AMS dating.
So, trying to think, because I was only looking at the plant remains. Did Michelle Alexander, under Margie Scarry's direction, did the plant remains from Velda, High Ridge, Lake Jackson as part of it. They also looked at Escambay, the Spanish artifacts, the two with that standard. I had done part of the inventory for Escambay, the 8LE 120, and then the San Luis Mission. I did participated in inventorying those artifacts for a while, and did a illustrated ID thing on those. but so that there are the artifact comparisons and things of the Spanish types that match. But yeah, they could, but I was pretty sure that, there were a period of time where they were dying off, and there were two rebellions, and the Spanish came down heavy on both of them. But because the artifacts in that deposit looked like later, I figured it was closer to the 1675 period of that particular rebellion. But there was so much in most of the Lamar stuff concentrated in that structure 2 area. There was a light scattering across the village area. The village area had the normal Fort Walton components spread over the whole area. And it included the occupants. The dude who occupied structure 2, likely because he was a chief, had multiple spouses. And at least one of them was making the traditional, Lake Jackson series material, and the other was making the Lamar series material.
And how did they get along?
Probably well. I mean, after all, the Spanish came in. They're the ones that started making a change to patrilineal and patrilineality. Most of the Southeastern folks were matrilineal and matrilocal.
Well, I think
So
it would be interesting to know, Louis, based on the material, and probably Marie would know as well, if there are good contextualized samples of carbon that we could go back and retest. That would be informative, because Scary
Louis knows more about every single artifact. He has looked at every single artifact in the collection. I would rely on his memory, but I would have to go look in the database. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
But I think there is, based on what Louis has said.
Email me and remind me tomorrow. I'll be happy to look it up for you.
We'll look into that, because I think there is more possibility for sampling. And then also, that was our whole goal when we found out that nothing had been tested around the mound. It had only been south of the mound, where I-10 currently exists, that we might find a feature. That was our goal before CODA shut us down, to see if we could find anything that we could generate another sample of something that was datable. That was
during the
strategy.
6-meter grid surface collection, there were some concentrations of artifacts up near the mound that would be north of the I-10 fence, by today's terms, in the preservation area, that would have suggested activity areas where they were processing, stuff, because there were the flint flakes and shaves that showed working bone and wood and other things, and probably butchering of hides and stuff. There were also some concentration of the burnt daub, showing the wall structure. If the buildings didn't get burnt, then all you had was a ring of clay when they decayed, and that got plowed away for the most part.
Your job is wonderful. With the palm fronds in it, that is so cool. Why do you think, and Bullen said this back in the 50s, that Fort Walton hardly has any stone tools? Were they using cane knives and arrow points? Were they using so much bone that all decayed? Or were they just peaceful? We don't want to shoot anybody.
Some of it relates to, that was the warming cycle for about 1000 AD until the little ice age, which kind of collapsed things. But there was that warming cycle, which would have raised the sea level, also would have increased interior rainfall, so that some areas that would have been exposed, chert outcrops, accessible in the past. I think that's why they were going back and spending so much time mining the old quarry-related base camps, because much of the quarries themselves, except during drought times, were underwater, and then they didn't have access to some of the cherts in Lake Jackson and the Piney Z Lake area unless the sinkholes breached and drained the lakes. Then it exposed for a short period of time the inundated material that they could salvage and get to. But for the most part,
there's no stone tools in the Apalachicola Fort Walton either. And so it's something cultural that they just didn't make very much.
They're making an awful lot of bone stuff. If you recall on some of the DeSoto narratives, I forget whether it was Ron Hill or Biedma, but they narrated a time where the DeSoto expedition stopped this Indian who was going by himself, and he demonstrated what he had, and it was sort of like an itinerant salesman selling the vacuum cleaners, except he had in his quiver classic examples of stuff that he took out and demonstrated and showed each of them, and they talked about the stone blades and how elegant they were, but they also talked about bone points and wooden or cane points.
And the canes, yeah.
And of course, over in the Apalachicola, you have gar scales, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got stingray barbs that can use, catfish spines. They had a whole bunch of stuff they could have used. When I was with the Guayme, most of their stuff is wood there, and except for the
From
iron.
Panama, when he was
That's
in the
Panama.
Peace Corps.
At any rate, they had carved knob-like, looked like a top with a tendon on the bottom that socketed into the cane shaft for the arrow. And those were to stun birds. So they'd shoot the birds. But they also had a trident, or a three pronged things that they made with the black palm splinters that they put on arrows to get some of the fish and stuff. So there were a lot of harpooning and stuff like that. Sorry.
I got a question about the like some of those really nice pieces of burned daub with the impressions of wattle and cane and stuff and posts. Do you think that that's like typical of kind of like Velda phase, like Fort Walton structures, or is that like some kind of different type of building? Because like I think Han, John, who is it? It's Han mentions the like houses in like among the Apalachee missions are mostly like thatch or like palm covered. He doesn't really mention there being like
it's cabbage palm
like daub ones. But
the daub is the wall, the clay plastered walls. It's a clay plastered wall.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like on the old buildings that I had, you had lathwork going across the wall, and then they put plaster on it on our own historic structure. But there, what they did is they had the split cane matting, or just intertwined smaller limbs, like making like a basket kind of weave around the post themselves, because the posts were spaced about a meter apart. But the residential structures, at least in this area, are primarily round or oval. Only the set of the special structures, kind of like the difference between the courthouse and a residence.
Mm-hmm.
Those are set on the historic courthouses and our capitals and stuff. Were set up on platform to distinguish them, and their shape is different. So those were more, the rectangular structures were the ones on the mounds in this area. Now, I know it gets different. If you run up the Chattahoochee, then they tend to go toward rectangular structures for residences and otherwise, rather than the round structures. The round structures seem to go back to Deptford and Wheaton Island in this area.
And Temecula to the east.
But the earlier Deptford and Wheel Island that weren't daub coated. For whatever reason, that's a later thing. And it may be Mississippian, because when I was digging at the Humber site in Mississippi, those were wattle and daub structures.
Yeah, well, so I was curious about this because like when Han's talking about Apalachee province, he's talking about the houses are made of thatch, grass, or palm leaves. Like they don't even have daubed walls, it sounds like, in his description. But like some of maybe the more like I guess public structures maybe do. Like that maybe like the descriptions here from Apalachee have them not like thatched either. So I'm like, I don't know. Do you think that a daubed building is like typical, I guess, of Fort Walton domestic structures?
As opposed to the residence of a higher status person.
Or
So-
without, he's
so
talking
maybe-
about thatching
so-
without the actual
so,
clay construction.
I know there some areas. It's out of here, but at the Mount Royal Village area, there Calvin found that the structures had the like cypress bark or other bark used on the siding and stuff. And like in the Northeast,
What
where they
site was
use
that?
the PU-35, the Mount Royal Village area.
Hey, but remember, it's San Luis, the thatching goes all the way almost down to the ground. So if there is wattle and daub, you can't see it.
No,
And-
that's the way that they reconstructed that. Calvin and I disagreed with that reconstruction.
Did you? But also,
The reason being,
we know
the
they
reason
can't
being,
too.
on the structures that we have dug when we've excavated them, and there hadn't been the plow disturbance that's gotten down that far, you can pick up a drip zone that's about 18 inches to 2 feet out from the wall. And that doesn't have that's sort of like the same overhang that we've had on most of our modern buildings. You know, that council house that they reconstructed is side of fantasy in something. Just like the reconstruction of the block house on the fort, where they sized it up
Fred,
to
did
fit
you
people
approve
of our
that
current
floor
structure. They sized it up so that people my size and taller could walk into it. If you go to the historic things, like in Puerto Rico or elsewhere, those people were like 4'6" to 5'2" on average. They
But
didn't
the
have to duck.
Apalachee were very tall,
Yeah.
weren't they?
I had to duck to go into those things, but they sized up the buildings to fit modern stature. Anyhow, it's sort of close enough to give the impression of what it was. Oh, except that the thatching on the council house is wrong.
Duly
Well,
noted.
It was done by Zulu, wasn't it?
Done by Jim Miller and some other contractors.
That was the first one.
Oh, we're gonna throw Jim Miller
One
under
that
the
burnt.
Second, the third, yeah, we had
Yeah,
the Seminoles come up.
into it. But they weren't there. I mean, and it's surprised the Seminoles did that. Think of the thatching on a cheeky, how much overhang it has. But
All
yes,
right.
but yes, for the regular residences, going back to Marty's question, some of them may very well have been opened or just had heavy mats during certain times of the year, so
Without,
that you could raise the mat
without
so during the-
propane, yeah.
during the hot times and let it come under. But a properly made wattle and daub structure is like a thermos thing. It holds heat in the winter and it holds the coolness during the summer because the moisture in the walls is sweating and evaporating. The same as you keep water cool in the olive jars because it sweats through the olive jar and keeps it cool. Whereas that same water in a metal canteen would get hot in the same setting. Anyhow, sorry.
Do you think that the white wolf is a reincarnation of the shaman?
What?
They're all
What
sort
about
of
the stone?
they're all sort of reports of white wolves. If you look on the internet, these Ghostbuster guys are always reporting white wolves out on Velda.
The whitewash walls were the Spanish ones out
No,
there.
no, no,
Oh,
no.
what?
White wolves. Remember?
Oh, white wolves.
Remember we were out there and that guy, that
Yeah.
kid said that he
Yeah.
saw the apparition?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I don't know. Sorry. My hearing's a little defective, and
No, but
you were saying white wolf,
Yeah,
and I was hearing white walls.
but
'cause I was
honestly,
still
Lonnie,
thinking dog.
I have heard 3 separate accounts of apparitions out there. So
we
I'm
should
just
go
saying.
Halloween and
Mary, I nominate Mary to go check it out.
go sit there out Halloween, sure, what the heck?
yeah.
Were all apparitions white wolves?
No, some of them were Apalachees.
What do you think, Lonnie?
I think it'd be fun to go look.
Okay, I said I propose
You and
the
Mary
next
report
meeting be
back.
held out at Velda in the evening on
I
Halloween.
think I'm gonna be sick that day. Louis, Mary, thank you so very much.
Hey,
This
can
is
I ask, Marie, can I ask
Oh,
Louis a
sorry,
quick
Fred.
question? Yeah, can I ask you a quick question, Louis?
Sure.
The Leon Jefferson pottery that you analyzed from Velda and a lot of other sites too, I'm sure. Does that indicate to you that the Lamar people in Georgia were displaced and pressured and then moved into Northwest Florida and amalgamated with the Apalachee?
Yeah, I think they were displaced.
You do?
I think like if the Spanish accidentally like infected people and they had the population decline that they talk about, then the Muskogean folks started their expansion that became the Creek Confederacy.
Mhm.
And I think that displaced some of the people. They were already trading with them because at the Martin site and some of the Spanish sites, you get incidental occurrences. But then when you got the later occurrences, early in the Leon Jefferson site sequence, you seem to get a dominance of the Fort Walton with the melding of some of the Lamarche. And then later on, it becomes more balanced and more Lamar plus Fort Walton. And the Fort Walton starts dropping out as far as preference on styles.
And you think that's because
It's hard to
they were displaced and then moved into Northwest Florida?
I think they were partly displaced. I think they were exchanging. And if I'm recalling correctly, it seemed that John Hand said that the translators didn't have problems like speaking to the people up north, the Yamasees and the others, although those are all in Carolinas. But with the north, just immediately north, they would have been on the Lake Jackson and west. But they did have problems when they were crossing the Apalachicola and getting into to that area, communicating and stuff. And then Haas, I think it was HASS, Mary Haas, did the linguistic stuff for the Apalachee. John Hand cited it in his Apalachee, the Rivers book, on some of that stuff. But anyhow, I think that is a melding of the two populations. I think that they also had that. That's my explanation. For Calvin dug a site west of town that's on near one of the I-10 borrow pits that he called the borrow pit site. And that was one that had the council house feature. It's the only council house feature that had burials in it. And I think that the flue from the DeSoto Passage caught that village, and that I don't know where the everyday people were buried, but the high status people, unusual pattern, got buried in the that structure. And that's
Thank you, Louis. That was a good talk. Thank you.
All right,
Yeah.
Dr.
Yeah, good
Prentice
talk.
has a question.
Okay, so I have a question for you now, Louis. Your previous answer suggested to me that you thought that Lamar culture, peoples infiltrating down into Florida, were pushed out by Muskogee persons. And why would you think that? I don't understand why you wouldn't think that Muskogee were also Lamar people.
they were. The first groups, if you look at the Smokeachobee sites and you look at some of the Cool Branch sites and some of the other Conus Valley, which Nancy White has looked at more.
Okay.
The pipes at Velda are like Smokeachobee pipes, except for the elbow pipes and stuff. But the ceramics, the Cool Branch, is a variant of one of the Moundville incised Snow's Bend is the shell tempered variant. They're coming out of that area, and it's actually distinct because when you start getting, and Marie again, Nancy White has looked at
Nancy Marie, in your defense. It's confusing.
Can I ask again?
Just don't
I
call
got
me
NM
dinner.
Okay, so my point.
And there's the middle name.
Is
Nancy
Moundville
Marie.
is not,
Nancy Marie White.
Moundville is not Lamar.
And at
Lamar
any
is
rate,
Lamar is coming out of north central Georgia.
yeah,
And
it looks more like the Ocmulgee Fields stuff. And then Sears, south of Kolomoki, came up with that Mercer check stamped, and that's the narrow high lands variant on the checks, and then whereas the Leon variant is the lower broader lands and on the stamping and stuff. So I had the two
okay, so you're talking about very late Lamar.
Yeah. So but the ceramics seem to be coming from down the Ochlockley area into here, more so than through the Smokeachobee, the Chattahoochee Flint River coming down.
So you think this Lamar influence is early 17th century?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Lamar, when it started out, when you had over Nancy, it's been a while since I read Lorne and Blitz, Chattahoochee Chieftains, but it seems to me that the Roots phase was being modified by the Lamar people moving westward toward the Apalachee, toward the Chattahoochee area.
Okay, and that occurred around 1650, 1675?
That's it. It's been a while. I've got to go back and look at that. It's been a year or so since I was more interested in the Florida stuff. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm just interested in your Lamar connection.
Lorne and Blitz, Chattahoochee Chieftains, would probably answer that question on the spread of Lamar, because in their sequence, as I recall, it was later and starting to amalgamate and submerge the older stuff. And the original stuff was coming out of the Moundville area.
I think it came as early as DeSoto.
Huh?
I think it came as early as DeSoto, because as soon as he went through and coughed on everybody, people moved. And the big question is, why did they move toward Tallahassee, which is not easy to do because you can't just go downriver from north or central Georgia and get into Tallahassee. why did they move there? But by the time the Spanish came to missionize, Apalachee were this amalgamation of.
They come down the Apalachee drainage. They come down the Apalachee River drainage.
They could
It
have.
brings them right to San Luis.
Yep, yep.
And now the Macon Plateau, group. In the
Yeah,
south.
I can understand that. Toa, probably the Flint River, Lamar cultures that were there in southwestern Georgia. After that was abandoned with the introduction of the DeSoto introduced diseases, probably would have fled that area. And if they had migrated down into northern Florida, that would make sense. I can understand that.
If you saw Dennis Blanton's new book, he has a site in south central Georgia that looks like DeSoto just left yesterday. And a lot of folks disagree with him, but he has all the stuff, all the Spanish stuff, the right beads, the right pottery and everything. And, it's, who knows? But
So
there.
when you think of it, like at Mavilia and at the Martin site, we wouldn't have had stuff. And the part of the Martin site we have is just the periphery of the larger village area. It's not the heart of it. But most of it's would be under the shopping mall if you looked at the old topos. But at any rate, but for the Native Americans trying to fight and setting their own village on fire, plus the tent structures of the Spanish, then we wouldn't have had this lost Spanish artifacts. It would be the clue, because they weren't throwing their stuff away. Yeah, it was only in the excitement of the event and the fortuitousness of it that we have those artifacts. But yeah, but it's
So anyways,
but
sorry about pressing
I like
about
it.
the Lamar stuff, but it was very enjoyable. Really enjoyed it, Louis. Good presentation.
Very good.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you,
Louis.
everybody.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're signing off now.
Thank you, Louis.
Yeah, we're gonna sign off soon. But I would just like to say that the collection that Louis looked at, I have to say, it's got to be at least 20 boxes of material. And he looked at every single artifact in every one of those boxes. And it's just amazing to me that he could pull all this information together and recreate that map that we've never seen before. To put the mound in
nothing
context.
else. Yeah.
It's just really tremendous. And we really appreciate you pulling this all together and giving us this presentation, Louis. And when we get back to normal, we owe you a past t-shirt. So if we could give Louis a round of applause.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Marie,
Thanks, Louis.
now,
Yes, sir.
could you email to Nancy the entire report with all the
We'll make sure
more
that
detailed appendices
And
and
Nancy
stuff?
will remind me if I forget.
we'll make sure that
Can I wait for the movie?
Because then if Nancy will go through it, maybe she can find some students to take it to the next generation.
There you go. That's a wonderful idea. I love it. I love it.
Thank
And
you,
Nancy, it's been
Louis.
a pleasure having you join us, our longtime member who's never been able to
Well,
join us.
I'm so thrilled I get to do this twice in a row because it's before that
Yeah.
it was many years since I had been to a
Good.
past meeting.
there are a lot of advantages to Zoom, aren't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And Nancy, perhaps you would like to be a presenter,
Oh, you're
one of
listening.
our upcoming
Yes.
Zoom meetings,
Yeah.
or
Well,
one
the
of your
good part
students.
about it is most times when I get to hang around Nancy, you got to deal with poison ivy. 'Cause
That's
it's
right.
usually in the
There's no
field.
poison
No
ivy.
poison ivy. You can virtually pretend
If
that you
it's
have
there, she'll find it.
No ticks either.
Not talk about it anymore. I'm already itching.
And Mary, thank you so much for,
No, thank
for
you.
putting all of this together. This has
Our
been a
pleasure.
lot of
It was
fun.
great. We're so happy to be able to participate, and until November.